The smell came first before I understood what I was looking at. Copper and ammonia and something else, something cooked. I stood in the doorway of Habitation Block 7 Secundus, with my data slate still warm in my hand, the requisition forms for grain distribution half completed, and I knew that the rest of my life would be measured in the time it took for that smell to stop meaning anything at all. Behind me, Castellan Veric made a sound I had never heard a man make before. I was a municipal logistics coordinator, grade 4, assigned to Hive Tertius under the Administratum's Secondary Resource Allocation Bureau. 23 years of service, spotless record. I had processed 17 million requisition forms, authorized 842,000 grain shipments, and sent 93 appeals up the chain regarding caloric deficits in the lower stacks. My immediate supervisor had commended me twice. I wore my identification tag on a clean cord. I arrived at my desk at the beginning of each shift cycle and left at the end. I had never seen a gene-forged soldier before the day they arrived, and I had never seen what one could do to a person until I stood in that doorway. The Emperor's finest, they called them. His angels. His wrath made manifest. They had been hunting a heretic. The habitation block was a standard structure, 60 meters by 40, corrugated plasteel walls, 117 registered occupants according to my records. The heretic had been identified by the ecclesiarchy's local enforcers 3 days prior, a mid-level machinist named Gorvus, who had been overheard questioning the necessity of the tithe during a communal meal. The enforcers had submitted the report. The report had gone to the district magistrate. The magistrate had authorized investigation. Investigation had revealed seditious literature, 3 pamphlets hand-copied, circulation unknown. The matter had been escalated to the Inquisitorial Liaison Office. The soldiers had arrived the next morning. There were 5 of them, and they wore crimson armor the color of arterial spray. I watched them from my office window as they marched through the lower plaza, and the crowd parted like water before a blade. They were taller than any man I had ever seen, taller than 2 men perhaps, their shoulders broad enough that they had to turn sideways to pass through standard doorways. Their helmets were eyeless and impassive, and when they walked, the ground transmitted vibrations I could feel through the soles of my boots even 4 stories above. I had felt awe then. Reverence. I was supposed to feel that. We were all supposed to feel that. They had gone to Block 7 Secundus at the beginning of the 3rd shift cycle. Castellan Veric and I had been dispatched 6 hours later to conduct the post-action census and resource reclamation assessment. Standard procedure. The soldiers had departed by then, moving on to another district, another hunt. We were to document what remained, catalog losses, redistribute habitation assignments, and file the necessary reports. I had brought my data slate and 300 identification bands for reissue. The air inside Block 7 Secundus did not move. It hung thick and wet, and the smell was so dense I could taste it on my tongue, salt and iron and burnt pork. The walls were no longer grey. They were red and brown and black, and in places I could see handprints, smears, long streaks that ran from ceiling to floor, as though something had been dragged. The heretic had lived in compartment 7 to 12C, a single occupancy unit in the western stack. According to my records, he had a wife and 3 children registered in adjacent compartments. The soldiers had started there. Compartment 7 to 12C no longer had a door. The frame was intact, but the door itself had been torn away and now lay 15 meters down the corridor, bent in half. Inside, the walls were cratered, deep fist-sized indentations in the plasteel. The floor was a single unbroken stain. Gorvus was still there, most of him. I had seen corpses before. The hive took everyone eventually, Accidents, disease, malnutrition, despair. I had processed death certificates and reassignment forms and next of kin notifications. I understood death as a logistical reality, a line item, a variable in the distribution equation. I had never seen a corpse that had been taken apart. He was in pieces, not cleanly severed, not surgical, torn. His limbs had been wrenched from their sockets, and I could see the exposed joints, the white gleam of bone, the ragged tissue. His chest had been opened, ribs splayed outward like the petals of some grotesque flower. His skull was intact but empty, the top removed with precision, the contents gone. The walls around him were decorated with what had been inside. Castellan Veric vomited in the corridor. I heard him retching, heard the wet splatter, but I did not turn. I was staring at the compartment's sleeping pallet, where a small bundle of fabric lay folded neatly in the corner. A child's blanket, pale blue, embroidered with stars. I checked my data slate. Corvus's daughter, age 7, name Mela. I found her in compartment 7 to 12D. She was on the ceiling. I do not know how they put her there. I do not know if she was dead first, or if they made her watch what they did to her father, or if she screamed, or if the sound of her screaming is what brought the others running. I know that her body was pressed into the metal with such force that the ceiling had deformed around her, creating a shallow impression in the shape of a child. I know that her arms were folded behind her back, and that her neck was bent at an angle that made her face the door. I know that her eyes were open. The other compartments were worse. They had not stopped with the heretic's family. Block 7 Secundus was a communal structure, and when the soldiers had breached the door, the occupants had come to see what was happening. Neighbors, friends, people who had lived beside Corvus for years, and who perhaps knew about the pamphlets or perhaps did not. It had not mattered. The soldiers had killed them all. I counted 63 bodies in the first corridor alone. They were piled against the walls, stacked in doorways, crumpled in heaps where they had tried to run. Most of them were intact enough to identify, though some were not. A woman with grey hair and a green work smock had been folded in half backward, her spine snapped, her legs touching the back of her head. A man in his 30s had been torn open from groin to throat. His intestines spilled across the floor in a glistening coil that stretched 3 meters. An infant, no more than a year old, swaddled in cloth, had been driven headfirst into the wall with enough force to embed it there. A small, crumpled shape that no longer looked like anything human. Castellan Veric was sobbing behind me, a high, keening sound that echoed off the plasteel. I did not sob. I walked from compartment to compartment, data slate in hand, and I recorded what I saw. In compartment 7 to 14A, I found a man who had been flayed. His skin lay beside him in a crumpled heap, and his exposed musculature gleamed wetly in the dim light. His face was gone, but I recognized his identification tattoo on his left shoulder, machinist 3rd class, registration number 447 to 823 Theta. His name was in my records, Jorik Hannell, 41 years old, 2 children, wife deceased, scheduled for promotion review next quarter. In compartment 7 to 15B, I found a woman whose hands had been removed and whose mouth had been forced open so wide that her jaw had dislocated. Her tongue was gone. So were her teeth. A piece of parchment had been shoved down her throat, and I could see the edge of it protruding from her lips. I did not pull it out. I did not want to know what it said. In compartment 7 to 16C, I found 9 people who had been locked inside and burned. The door had been sealed from the outside, and the compartment's single ventilation grate had been welded shut. The bodies were black and brittle, clustered near the door where they had clawed at the metal until their fingers broke. I documented everything. I noted names, ages, occupations, compartment assignments. I calculated the resource deficit, 117 registered occupants, 117 confirmed deaths, 0 survivors. I made notes regarding redistribution of habitation space and revised the district's grain allocation downward by the appropriate percentage. My handwriting was steady. My entries were complete. Castellan Veric stopped sobbing after the first hour. He sat in the corridor with his back against the wall and stared at nothing. I asked him twice if he could continue. He did not answer. I completed the census alone. It took me 4 hours to process every compartment. When I was finished, I stood in the central corridor and reviewed my notes. Everything was in order. The forms were complete. The data was accurate. I had fulfilled my assignment. I could still smell them. We returned to the administrative complex in silence. Veric walked 3 paces behind me, his face slack, his eyes unfocused. I submitted my report to my supervisor, Deputy Administrator Callas, and waited while he reviewed it. He nodded twice, made a notation in the margin and stamped it with his seal. "Efficient work," he said. "The redistribution figures are acceptable. Submit the revised grain allocation to the district provisioner by end of cycle." I said nothing. "Was there a problem?" he asked. I looked at him. He was 53 years old, balding, soft around the middle. He had worked in the administratum for 30 years. He had 3 children and a wife, who made small ceramic figurines that she sold in the lower markets. I had attended his daughter's bonding ceremony 2 years ago. I had drunk his wine and congratulated him and shaken his hand. "No, sir," I said. "No problem." He smiled. "Good. Dismissed." I returned to my desk and began processing the revised allocation forms. My hands did not shake. My entries were correct. I completed the work in 47 minutes and submitted it for approval. Then I sat at my desk and stared at the wall. The soldiers had been hunting a heretic, and they had found him. They had executed him, and everyone who might have been complicit, and everyone who might have known, and everyone who might have suspected, and everyone who had simply been nearby when they arrived. 117 people, reduced to meat and ash and smears on plasteel walls, because one man had questioned the tithe. This was justice. This was the emperor's will. This was how the Imperium endured. I went home that night and ate my ration of grey protein paste and drank my cup of reclaimed water. I lay on my sleeping pallet and stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep. I could still smell them, copper and ammonia and cooked meat. I could still see the child on the ceiling, her eyes open, her neck bent, her arms folded behind her back. I could still hear the wet sound Castellan Veric had made when he vomited. The next morning, I returned to my desk. I processed requisition forms. I authorized grain shipments. I filed reports. My supervisor commended me on the efficiency of my census work and assigned me additional duties in resource reclamation. I accepted without comment. 3 weeks later, I was summoned to the district magistrate's office. The magistrate was a thin man with a narrow face and eyes like chips of stone. He sat behind a desk of polished wood, real wood, imported, worth more than I would earn in a decade, and regarded me in silence for a long moment. "Your work in Block 7 Secundus was exemplary," he said. "You are being promoted." I said nothing. "Grade 5 coordinator," he continued. "Expanded authority. Increased resource allocation oversight. Your new assignment begins next cycle." He slid a data slate across the desk. "Sign here." I looked at the slate. The promotion was everything I had worked toward for 23 years. Higher pay, better rations, access to mid-tier habitation. My children, if I chose to petition for breeding rights, would be eligible for secondary education. I signed. The magistrate nodded. "Good. The Imperium rewards the faithful." He leaned back in his chair. "You will be assigned to oversee post-action logistics for inquisitorial operations in this district. Your familiarity with the process will be invaluable." I understood then. I was being promoted because I had not flinched, because I had walked through Block 7 Secundus with my data slate and documented the carnage without complaint. Because I had submitted my report on time and with accurate figures, and I had not questioned what I had seen. Because I could be trusted. "Understood, sir," I said. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I have overseen 37 post-action operations in the 14 months since my promotion. The soldiers come, and they kill, and I count the dead. I document the losses. I redistribute the resources. I file the reports. The work is steady. The pay is adequate. My supervisor commends me regularly. Last week, I was assigned to Block 9 Quartus. Another heretic, another hunt. This time, the soldiers killed 206 people. I found a woman in compartment 9 to 18F who had been torn in half at the waist, her upper body lying 3 meters from her legs. I found a man whose skull had been crushed so thoroughly that his brain matter had sprayed across an entire wall, forming a pattern that almost looked like a flower. I found 12 children in a single compartment, stacked like firewood, their small bodies broken and discarded. I documented everything. I submitted my report. I received my commendation. Castellanveric never returned to duty. He was declared mentally unfit and reassigned to labor detail in the lower reclamation plants. I heard he died 6 months ago, an accident involving industrial machinery. No one investigated, no one cared. I think about him sometimes. I think about the sound he made in that corridor, that high, keening wail, and I wonder if he was weaker than me or stronger. I wonder if breaking was a mercy, or if enduring is the greater cruelty. I do not sleep well anymore. When I close my eyes, I see compartments 7 to 12D and the child pressed into the ceiling. I see her eyes, wide and empty, staring at the door. I see the blue blanket folded neatly in the corner. I have stopped eating meat. Even the protein paste, gray and tasteless and unidentifiable, makes me gag. I can taste copper on my tongue always, no matter how much water I drink. But I go to work. I process my forms. I file my reports. I accept my commendations. Because this is what the Imperium requires. This is what humanity's survival demands. The soldiers are the Emperor's angels, his wrath made manifest, and they do what must be done to root out heresy and corruption and weakness. They kill the guilty and the complicit and the ignorant and the innocent, because there is no other way. Because mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. Because the galaxy is vast and hostile and filled with horrors beyond comprehension, and only the strongest, the most ruthless, the most unyielding can endure. I understand this now. I have been taught. Yesterday I was summoned to the magistrate's office again. Another promotion. Grade 6 coordinator. Expanded oversight. Increased authority. The Inquisitor himself has taken notice of your work, the magistrate said. You have been selected for specialized training. You will be assigned directly to the inquisitorial staff. I signed the forms without reading them. I am being rewarded. I am being elevated. I am being trusted with greater responsibility because I have proven myself capable. Because I do not flinch. Because I document the dead with steady hands and accurate figures, and I submit my reports on time. Because I can look at a child on a ceiling and see only a line item. I go home that night and I sit on my sleeping pallet and I stare at the wall. The smell is still there, copper and ammonia and cooked meat, even though I have not been to a post-action site in 3 days. It is in my clothes, it is in my skin, it is in my lungs. I think about Block 7 Secundus. I think about 117 people who died because one man questioned the tithe. I think about the woman folded backward, the man torn open, the infant embedded in the wall. I think about the compartment full of burned bodies, their fingers broken and bloody from clawing at the door. I think about the soldiers and what they can do and what they are permitted to do, and what I am complicit in by counting the dead and filing the reports and accepting the commendations. I think about the Imperium and what it requires and what it costs and who pays the price. I think about survival and whether it is worth it. But I do not stop. I do not refuse. I do not break. Tomorrow, I will return to my desk. I will process requisition forms. I will authorize grain shipments. I will await my next assignment, and when the soldiers come and the killing begins, I will walk through the blood and the ash, and I will count the dead. Because this is what I am now. This is what the Imperium has made me. I am a logistician of atrocity, a clerk of slaughter, a functionary of genocide. I am complicit, and I am rewarded, and I endure, and the smell never fades.